Hi, this is Don Gettner with Ridge Engineering. In this tutorial, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to PC travel. This tutorial is primarily for people that haven't seen PC travel yet, want to take a look at it and see what it's all about. If you've used PC travel in the past, but not recently, this also would be a good tutorial because it shows many of the new features that have been added to PC travel in the last few years. I'm going to get right into this. I'm assuming that you've installed PC Travel and that went okay. There is a quick directions manual that is on the PC Travel support site that walks you through the process of installing the software and getting everything going. So I'm going to assume that all that went okay. You're now running the software on your desktop computer in your office, and you want to see what it's all about. So when you run the software, the first thing that you see is the startup options screen. And the first time you run the software, you'll need to edit the preferences. And I'll show you how to do that. You click on the Define Edit Program Preferences button. That brings up the PC Travel Preferences screen. And the first screen that's open is the path options. And this is where various files that are used in the program are stored. Normally you can leave the default values where they are. There are a couple of exceptions. One is if you want to store your studies and your runs and all those on a network drive, then you would change the study group root path to someplace else besides the default. And typically you'll have map files for your area, and you'll go through a process of creating those map file projects. And most people will create individual folders for different counties in their area or collections of counties. And the map files path must point to the folder that has the maps that you're going to be using for that current session. For most people, that's the same folder all the time, but for some people that, like consultants that do studies various parts of the state, you might have to adjust this before you begin the real PC travel session. There's also a series of default values that almost nobody will edit, but they're here. There are English and metric units if you're in Canada or Europe or someplace where you want to use metric units, you can do that. And there's a bunch of others that I'm really not going to go into in details right now because for almost everybody, they're not a consideration. Everybody will have to edit the report options. This is what is printed at the top of every report. And for most people, it's like a letterhead on your stationery. You would set it once and then you wouldn't worry about it again. Some consultants like to have the client name on the report heading, and so they would edit this on a case-by-case basis. There's also a bunch of report options, and again, I'm not going to go through them now to save time, but at some point you may want to just play around with the software, change these settings, and see how they affect the various reports. And then there's a series of constants that are used in the fuel and emissions models that are used in the software, and these pretty much have been fixed, and there's almost no reason you would ever even think about changing any of these because nobody really knows how to change them. So just accept them, and but if for some reason you want to fool around with them, have at it. So once you've set the path options and maybe the report options, click OK. And those settings will be saved, and the next time you run PC Travel, those values will be automatically loaded into the software, and you normally won't have to do anything. Now what I'm going to do in this tutorial is process a data file that was collected in the field using the software that comes with PC Travel called GPS to LT2. And there is a tutorial on the support site that explains how to use that software. so I'm not going to go into any details here. I'm just starting with the fact that we did go out and collect some data. I'm going to use data that was collected a few years ago, but typically you go out and collect the data in GPS to LT. You'll bring the laptop back to the office and transfer the data file to your desktop computer using a network or a flash drive or however. And then you would run PC Travel to process that data. And what we want to do is we want to process a GPS to LT data file. So I'm going to click on that button. And that brings up a screen that defaults to one of the paths that was on the preferences where you store your field data files, and the default is a folder called field data files under PC Travel. And in this case I just have one study, the one that I want to use for this tutorial. It's called Gulf to Bay-1. It was done in November of 2008. It ran from 10 o'clock to 11:13 in the morning. They collected 6 runs, and they used version 2 of the software. The software has gone from version 1 to version 2, and there's slightly different data elements in those 2 versions, so sometimes it's useful to know which version was used to collect the data. So I'm going to select this. Now the software goes through that file that was collected in the field, and it creates this grid that it shows on the screen. And there's quite a bit of information on this screen, and you'll spend a fair amount of time on this screen when you're using PC Travel. It shows the data on a second-by-second basis, and you can see that the data started at 8 seconds after 10 o'clock, and the speed is shown in this column. The heading, which is the direction the vehicle is going for that second of data, and the heading is a number from 0 to 360. 0 and 360 is due north, 180 is due south, and you can see that in this case the vehicle was facing 90, roughly 90 degrees, or facing east when it started, and then it looks like it turned around a little bit and then finally started going roughly north, 260, actually roughly west. It also shows the latitude and the longitude, which normally you just make sure that the numbers are there. You don't really edit them in any way. There are some values that are also shown that come off of the GPS receiver. These will almost never be used, but if you have a problem and you call tech support, we might ask you what some of these values are, and it might give us a clue as to what's going on if there is a problem. Now, one of the options in GPS to laptop, GPS to LT2, is you can enter the direction that the vehicle is going at the beginning of every run. And in this data, that option was used. So you can see that for the first run, run number 1, the direction was set to westbound. And you can see the date and the time. And there's 1 second of data for each line on this grid. Now, one of the things that the software does is to make sure that there are no missing values. It's fairly common for the GPS receiver to be stuck underneath a power transformer or in a tunnel or in the shadow of a tall building, and you don't get any signal from the satellites for a few seconds. And so there might be some missing data points in the grid. The software recognizes that, and it gives you an opportunity to fix those points. Now, in this data, it was all very clean. You can tell that because the OK button is green. If the OK button were a light red, then there's a process that you would go through to fix those data points, and they involve using the missing speed options buttons on the right here. We'll probably put up a video, another tutorial that explains the various options for fixing missing data, and look for that if you're interested in how to do that. Generally, you just click on the Find and Fix All Speeds, and almost all the problems will normally be fixed. There's also some options for if you use a data logger to collect your data. PC Travel now has an option to support little data loggers that are GPS receivers that have their own memory in them, and you don't need a laptop with these devices. They have some disadvantages and advantages. There is a tutorial on the support site that discusses how to use data loggers in PC Travel, so I won't go into any details here, except to say that you use these buttons and controls on the left-hand side. So now, once we have the OK button green, either because it's clean to start with or we fixed some data, we click on the OK button. And the software goes through and creates run files from that data, and it stores that data in a folder called the temp folder. And you can see that in this case there were already some files in the temp folder, which is fine. You may or may not have some left over when you're done, but we're only interested in the Gulf to Bay runs, which are shown at the top. Now we have a couple of options. Some people like to rename the runs in different ways, and you have that option on this screen. And just to show you how that works, I'm going to change these runs. I'm going to select the eastbound runs. You can see it has EB in the name. Again, that came from the option that was used in the field when the data was collected. I'm going to change the direction up here to eastbound, and I'm going to set the run number to 001 to start, and then I'm going to hit the rename button. And what it does is it renames the run, and now they're just a little bit cleaner. They don't have this -1 in there that really doesn't add anything to the software. So the name is a little bit shorter. It will fit a little bit better on the reports. It's not critical, but it's something that you can do. Now I'm going to unselect those and now select the westbound runs. And I'm going to change the eastbound to westbound, and I'm going to actually I have to there. I'm going to rename them. So now I have the westbound runs with nice clean names and the eastbound runs with nice clean names. Now my next step is to create study groups, which are folders where I'm going to store these runs that I've renamed. Now I've already done this, but typically what you would do is you would, under study groups, you would type in a new name, new study group name, whatever, and hit enter, and that would pop down into here. So now what I'm going to do, because I've already done this and I don't want to have multiple files that would confuse things, I'll just show you the process. So you're going to I'm going to select the eastbound runs, and normally I would select the eastbound folder and then hit the move runs button, but right now I'm just to show you what happens, I'm going to select this new study group name and hit run, and what happens is they just move. So the software moves the files from the temp folder where they're stored now into this new folder that you've created. And I'm going to do the same thing for the westbound. Now normally I would select the westbound and then I'd hit move and they would move over. Now if I want to, I can get rid of these, but there's no, you can do that in Windows, you don't have to do it here. So what I've done is I've taken the temporary files, the run files, renamed them, and then created two new folders, two new study groups, and I've moved those runs to those folders. Now this screen takes a little bit of practice to get used to using, but once you are good with PC Travel and you've been using it for a while, you'll find that this screen is very convenient and it's very quick to rename the runs, move them around. Actually, there's nothing being done here that you can't do in Windows Explorer. It's just more convenient to see it all here and see what it all looks like. Okay, so now we have the raw runs from the field in some folders. So I'm going to click on OK. That brings me back to the startup options screen. And now I want to edit those runs. And there are several ways of doing that. What most people do is they start a new travel time run. And I'm going to start a new one. Clean all this out. And now I'm going to add the runs that I want to edit. And I click on the Add button. It brings up the Select Runs screen. And now I can navigate to the folder where my runs are stored. Now, normally you would just see your runs. We have 3 eastbound runs. These other runs that are shown here are the end product of what we're going to do. And I'm not going to go through each run and edit each one in this tutorial. So I had to have them set up in advance. So normally you would pick the 3 runs, or however many you have, hit select, and now you can see them on the main screen. Anytime we talk about the main screen in PC Travel, this is the screen we mean. It's the one with the icons near the top and the drop-down menus at the top. And here are the list of runs that are going to be in this study. And then down here are some parameters that you can edit for the study, and we'll get to them a little bit later. But what I want to do is I want to map these runs. So I'm going to click on the map button. Now it loads the map that was pointed to in the preferences screen under the map files path. And in this case, it's a map of Pinellas County in Florida, near where I live. And this is the map screen. And you can see at the top that there's the runs that we have. On the right hand side are some options, and we can color code the speeds of the runs in different ways, and we have 3 different categories, and right now it's set for 0 to 10 will be shown in red dots, 10 to 35 will be shown in green dots, and 35 and above will be shown as yellow dots. So just by looking at the runs, you can get a sense for how fast the cars were going as they were going along. So I'm just going to map a run. Now, I'm not going to go into the great details in this tutorial on all the things that you can do in the map, because that's explained in another tutorial in greater detail, and I don't want this tutorial to be ridiculously long. So I'm just going to show you quickly the process that you would go through. You would load a run, and then you would zoom in to where you want to trim the runs. Now normally when you drive, you will not try to time the start and end of each run to be exactly on the intersection of interest that represents the start and end of the runs. First of all, that's a little bit unsafe when you're driving. So what you normally would do is drive through the intersection and either start from the side of the road or just start the run by hitting the button on the remote control, which most people use, just before you get to the intersection, 5, 10, 15 seconds. In this case, they started from a stop a little bit off the road. You can see that. And there are some controls here. We can hit the last button to go to the end. And in this case, as they were driving, they would just pull off the side of the road and stop. All right, so I'm going to go to the first, and I can change the mode of the map by hitting the space bar, and with the hand I can drag the map around, and then I can change the mode to a finger, and I can click on a point, and I can trim the start. So now this run starts at this point, and we're going to do that for all of the runs. But first I'm going to trim the end, and I'm going to start at this Damascus Road for No particular reason. It just seems like a logical place. So I'm going to click on a point, and you don't have to be too fussy about the point that you start on. Every one of these points is 1 second of data. And so some people get very hung up on which point to pick, but it's only 1 second. And if you've got 500 or 600 seconds in your run, then you're only talking about a small percentage of a percentage of your travel time, and then that translates into small numbers in delay and all that stuff. So don't get too hung up on picking, being too worried about which point to pick. Anyone around the area is fine. And we're going to trim the end. So the points are being trimmed. Okay, so now this run ends just before it got to this road. Some people would pick this point. It's like I said, it's not that big a deal. All right, so we've trimmed the beginning and the end, and you do that for every run, and then you would rename the run. Typically, most people add a small t to the end of the run to show that it's been trimmed. And then for one of the runs, you would want to create a primary run, which is a run that has node information in it. And so you would typically, for this run, I would go to the first intersection that I wanted as part of my node structure for the studies, and say it was this Bayshore Boulevard. Looks like a pretty big intersection, and I would pick a point. Usually you pick a point that's just past everything of interest that has to do with that particular node, and click Insert Node. And then you have the opportunity to put the name that's of that. Now remember, there is another tutorial that explains all this in more detail. So I'm pretty much going to skip ahead and assume that I have trimmed all 3 runs, and I've added nodes to the first run, and I've saved that as a TN, meaning it's been trimmed and nodes have been added, and I've trimmed the 2 and the 3, and it's very quick, especially the trimming. So you select it, you go first, click, trim, last. In this case, we have to scroll a little bit. Select, trim, and then name. So it's very quick. That all took, what, 7 or 8 seconds to do a run. So if you have a bunch of runs, trimming them is very quick. And you only have to add nodes to one run in each direction. I'll show you how that works a little bit later. But you don't have to add nodes to every single run. Please don't do that. That's a lot of wasted effort, and it doesn't buy you anything in the long run. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of this. And now we've saved these runs with slightly different names. And now what I'm ready to do is I'm ready to create a study. And I'm going to hit New. That clears out everything that's in here. I'm going to add some runs. And I'm going to go back to the same study group, the same folder. And this time I'm going to pick the runs that I trimmed, including the primary run and the 2 trimmed runs. So I'll have 3 runs in this study. Now 3 runs is really not enough to do a real study. I'm doing it only 3 just to make things go quicker. Now one of the things that is built into the software is this confidence level stats section on the main screen here. And this uses the ITE procedure for calculating whether or not you have enough runs in this particular study to meet the permitted error of 1 mile per hour with a confidence level of 95%. Now, how that works, I'm not going to explain now, but you can see that I only have 3 runs, and given this type of data with these 3 runs, I would need more. I would need at least 8 runs to have a permitted error of 1% with a confidence level of 95%. Now, to be fair, this procedure is a little bit controversial. Some people think the math behind it is flawed. That's fine, but it is what it is, and it is what the ITE publishes. Now, these numbers, this 8 especially, is only shown on this screen. It's not printed on any reports in any way. So it's only for you to use as a guide. And you can ignore it if you want, or you can live and die by it. I know a lot of people do. And what this normally would say now is we only have 3 runs. We really need more eastbound runs in order for this study to probably have any real meaning. Otherwise, the random nature of the runs is giving the values that you're going to get out of this little meaning. So keep it in mind. It shows you, using the ITE procedure, the number of runs needed given what you started with, the variance in these. But you don't have to necessarily go by that, and it doesn't show up on any of the reports. All right, so I've added these 3 studies. It's always a good idea to take a quick look and make sure things make sense. For example, the length, they're all around 26,120, 30, 40 feet. So they're within 20 feet of one another. So that's good. These are all before studies, before runs. And you have the option of selecting whether these are before or after runs. And if you have both before runs and after runs in the same study, then the software generates statistics based on the differences between the before and after statistics, as well as the individual before and after statistics. So for travel time, for example, you'll see what the difference, the average difference between the travel time of all the before runs and all the after runs. And people use this when they retime their signals. They will do a series of runs before they implement their timing changes. They'll put in the timing changes, wait a few weeks for the traffic to adapt to the new patterns, do more runs exactly like the ones before, and then do a study with before and after runs and hope that the differences are positive due to the changes. And usually they are. Okay, so I have 3 runs in this study. And one of the things I have to do is just verify that the node names and distances make sense. And so to do that, I click on the view button. And you can see that the numbers all, you want to check that it starts at 0 and it ends at a high number, and that the names are there. Everything looks fine. So we're going to say OK. Now we're going to give this a name. And it defaults to the last name that was used, which in this case isn't very useful. So I'm going to call this Gulf to Bay eastbound. Now this is just an AM off-peak study. So I'm going to put that in the study. You can see that 10 o'clock, that's not the morning rush. That's the morning off-peak time. And that's what they were interested in when they were doing these particular runs. So I'm going to give it a name. And then you have a choice of editing the speed categories. And there are 3 of them. And the software calculates the percentage of time that the vehicle is going at or below these particular speeds. And in general, speed category number 1 is set to 0. That gives you the amount of stop time, the actual time that the vehicle is going 0 miles per hour. Some people will set this to 1 because a lot of GPS receivers will not actually go to 0. They'll show a 0.7, 0.8 miles per hour even when the car is not moving. So some people will set that to 1. The third category is usually set to the speed limit. So then you can get a sense for how many vehicles are speeding. And the number 2 setting can be any number of values depending on what you're looking for. The progression speed, a low but comfortable speed. There's lots of different logics that you can use for picking these numbers. There's another parameter called the normal speed. This is the speed that delay is referenced to. So you would put in a normal speed, and anything going slower than 40 miles per hour, in this case, would be considered as delay on some level. Um, Anything above 40 miles per hour you would consider as negative delay. And one of the options in the preferences screen is to ignore the negative delay. Some people will say, I want to know how much time is spent below my threshold of delay, but I don't care. 41 miles an hour or 61 miles an hour is about the same to me. So that's a choice that you can make, and there's a setting in the preferences to say set all negative delay, meaning anything above 40 miles an hour, just set that to 40 miles an hour and pretend that there's no real offsetting time to the amount of delay that's incurred on these runs. And one of the features of PC Travel is you can edit the normal speed for each segment, so that if you have a course where the speed limit changes because you have work zones, for example, or you have a school district, or you're going from one road type to another, possibly from an arterial to a freeway, back to an arterial, or you can change the normal speed. So if you had the normal speed set to 40, but you were going through a work zone that you were as part of this course, you might want to set the normal speed to 25, because anything below 25 is delayed, but anything between 25 and 40 really isn't in a work zone. So you can adjust that, and the software will automatically do all those calculations for you. All right, so we've created our runs, we've added the runs, we've given this study a name, we've at least checked the categories down here. Oh, I didn't do stop speed. Stop speed is a little bit different than speed category 1. This is the speed that is used to count the number of stops that are made by the vehicle. For some people, that's an interesting statistic. And so a stop, by definition, is if the vehicle is going above this for at least 1 second, and then below this for at least 1 second, and then goes back above this for at least 1 second. So if the vehicle stops at the very end of the course, that's not a stop. It's not counted as a stop because it has to go back up through the threshold. So if a vehicle is stopped at a signal, that normally will be 1 stop. If it gets to move ahead a little bit and gets above 5 miles an hour before it gets stuck in the queue again, that might be a multiple stop situation at that intersection. Most people set it to 5. Some people set it to 6 or 7 or 3 or 4, depending on the circumstances that they're looking at. Okay, so we've got the study, and now I've given it a name. If you want to put in a few notes, you can. They get printed on the reports, and you'll see that in a minute. I'm going to hit save, and it asks to confirm that you want to save this. I say yes. And now typically I can print this report. And I click on the print button, and it gives me all the options that I can print. And if I select all reports, all of the options generate 32 pages. So you can really crank out the pages with this software. Now, most people will print the table of contents, the study summary, the overall output statistics. The fuel and emissions is normally only printed if you're doing both before and after runs in the same study, although some people like to print them anyway. And then most people will print the 2 plots, the speed distance profile and the time space trajectory. So that's a typically you get 5 pages, but if you're doing this for a client, they may want much more detail, and so you can print reports that are based on each of the statistics, and then you can print graphs that go on for multi-pages if you want. And I would say play with these, see what they look like, and then decide what you want. You can always change the report options at this level. You can change the headings, and you can change what options that you want. And again, you can play with these on your own and to see what the effects are. When you're ready to generate the report, you click on OK, and the software will generate the report. Now, the way I do these tutorials doesn't show the report very well because the report automatically fills the screen, and I'm not using the entire screen. I'll show you very quickly what it looks like, and you can see that you can't see much. So I'm going to hit zoom. And I can't really. So that's not much help. So what I've done is I've created a PDF of these reports, and this is what they look like. So now this is the table of contents, and this is the study summary. This is the overall output statistics, and this is sort of where all the tabular form of the results are kept. So the travel time, the total average travel time of the 3 runs is 590.3 seconds. So that's based on 3 runs. There's an average of 4.7 stops. The average speed is 30.2. The total delay, which again is referenced to 40 miles an hour, is 160 seconds, and they have these other statistics. So this is the overall averages, and then these are the averages of the segments from the beginning, from node to node. So you get a lot of data on this one piece of paper. This is a speed distance profile of all the runs. So it plots all 3 runs, and it's speed versus distance. And then this dark black line is the average of those 3 runs. And you can see that the vehicle was stopping quite regularly. Probably we didn't add nodes at every intersection, and so there probably were some intersections along this road that were not included in the nodes. And then this is the time space trajectory of all runs, and this green line is the normal speed, 40 miles an hour in this case. And traffic engineers love this graph because you can see the progression very clearly, because anytime you see a horizontal jog, that's when the vehicle is not moving. It's stopped. Time is incrementing, but distance is not. So by looking at this and comparing it to the green line, traffic engineers can get a sense for how well the signals are working. And places where there's a lot of horizontal movement at an intersection indicates that the timing wasn't very good there. So in this run, the vehicle was stopped. You can see that the time incremented. And in these 2 runs, they went through this intersection on green lights. And now, but and then 2 of the vehicles got stopped and 1 went through, and so you can see a lot of information on this. And then if you want to print out more details, you can. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Now, once you've printed the report, you normally would go back and repeat the process. A lot of people like to edit all the runs in one session, do everything on the map at once, get all the runs nice and clean, and then create the studies afterwards. Creating the studies becomes very quick once you have all your runs edited. I mean, if I were to start from scratch, I would go to Add Runs, select my 3 runs, check that everything looks good, and they do, give it a name, hit Save, hit Print, select my reports, and typically print to a PDF. Most people don't print directly to printers to save paper. So you print to a PDF, and then you send that PDF to your client or or that's your end result that you show to various people. So once you have the runs edited and cleaned up, it's very quick to create studies in the software. Okay, that's a very quick introduction to PC Travel. I left out a lot more than I included, and that's always frustrating. But I hope you got a reasonable idea of the flow of the software and how it works. Thank you.